Welcome to Section 10, which is entitled Buyer's Consolidation Factors for 3PL Partner and Site Location. We actually have 2 sections left on buyer's consolidation, and then we will move on to the direct-to-store model. But in this section, we're looking to identify the factors we have to consider when choosing a 3PL partner for a buyer's consol operation, essentially a CFS operation at origin. Who's running it, what are their capabilities, and where is the site located? Needless to say, the key node in a buyer's consol model is the CFS, the Container Freight Station at origin. You'll note in our first bullet that we make reference to plural sites, more than one. There could be more than one in a country, in Ningbo and in Yantian in China, as an example. But also, depending on our model as an importer, we could work with CFSs in different countries too. Either way, all cargo channels in and out of these CFS facilities in a buyer's consol model, and those buyer's consol CFSs are always at origin. From this second bullet point forward, we're going to look at all of these factors that must be vetted out when selecting a CFS location and partner. The first is the proximity of a CFS to clusters of vendors. We've already said that buyer's consol works best when there is a geographic cluster of vendors. The first and original example of that being South China. We want to know how close is the CFS from the vendors so the suppliers, those vendors, don't have long distances to go for the inland freight from their factory to the CFS. On the other side of that transaction, we want to know how close the CFS is to the port of export. We consolidate cargo in the CFS from multiple vendors going to different locations. We still have to dray the container from the CFS to the port. We don't want it to be too far away. 10, 15, max 20 miles away. Who owns the facility? We bring this up because depending on the country, the physical plant of the CFS could be operated by a port, which is oftentimes state-owned or operated. We see that in Asia, so we just want to know who owns this building, who owns the operation. Also, next sub-bullet, consistent with the theme of operational ownership, the company that we're working with, is it a local company, a sole proprietorship? Is it a global 3PL? Is it a country-specific operation? We want to understand that also. Second to the last sub-bullet, how many companies are operating within a given CFS? It is quite common to see a number of third-party logistics companies operating within the same facility. It's almost analogous to a mall in a given building where one can walk down where all the dock doors are and see operations for 6 or 7 different 3PLs. How many are in there and who does what? And then lastly on this slide, the control over labor. Is it in-house labor, permanent employees of the operation, or any third-party type of operation? Where third-party logistics turns into 4th, 5th, and 6th party logistics. We want to know that for sure. Other factors to consider related here to the physical plant of the building itself. How big is it? Core consideration there. How many doors does the facility have for receiving of cargo from multiple vendors? Depending on the day of the week, certainly towards the end of a week when cargo is being consolidated and shipped out, vendors are shipping like crazy into these facilities. And if there aren't enough doors to receive the inland freight deliveries to the CFS, there's going to be a line out the CFS facility out into the street, and we might miss cutoff times. We want to know how many doors they have. CFS operations are all about floor space, not about racked space or storage. CFSs are not designed for storage. They're designed for quick in and out maneuvers. In today, out tomorrow type of operation. That type of facility needs a lot of floor space or marshaling area, as it's called, to manipulate cargo, put on labels, and certainly stuff containers. What are the hours of operation? 1 shift, 2 shift, 3 shifts. And naturally, security procedures as well. Is it a fenced facility? Do they have a perimeter? Is there a guard shack or a gate to go through? Do truckers have to check in to deliver cargo? All of the normal security procedures, we need to consider those too. Another variable to be thinking about is the facility bonded versus non-bonded. Foreign trade zone type of stuff. Typically, when an importer is working with vendors in one country, they don't need a bonded facility. If an importer is consolidating cargo in a CFS from multiple countries, Then it would have to be bonded because the cargo coming in from another country into the CFS in, let's say, South China, Yantian, that cargo is of foreign origin. It's physically in China, but it hasn't been cleared through customs. It's not going to stay in China. That's when you would need a bonded facility. The examples we talk about are vendor clusters in the same country. What type of value-added services does the 3PL offer? Retail-ready, things we've talked about a bit already. Additional packaging, even things like gift wrapping and holiday season. There's a bunch of different value-added services. We'll continue to talk about those. Third sub-bullet, to the extent we can find out, who are the other customers of a 3PL in a given facility? CFSs, by definition, are shared facilities. There's going to be cargo in there from a bunch of different vendors on behalf of a bunch of different importers into the United States. This is not a single user operation that we're talking about here. That's why, again, to the extent we can, who are the other customers in there? How big are they? How important will our import operation be to the 3PL operator? The other factor, as it relates to list of current customers, is remaining capacity in the building. We don't want to sign on with a 3PL at a CFS at origin that is chock-a-block full, and they're just taking on additional business to max out their revenue. What remaining capacity from a physical plant perspective does the 3PL have? What are their technological capabilities? Not just internally with their own operational software, as we see in the last sub-bullet point, but what is their capability to communicate with the outside world and communicate electronically with the steamship lines, certainly with the importer at destination in the United States? We want to have a full vetting process of technology, both internal and external. A significant consideration when vetting out 3PLs, we want to see a demonstrated capability of using standard operating procedures and routing guides. We've talked about this a lot, going all the way back to our sourcing and purchasing modules. Whether it's a vendor of product or a 3PL, we want to see examples of standard operating procedures and routing guides. We have to see a demonstrated capability and a commitment to a process orientation, because CFSs and logistics in general are all about executing on processes. What KPIs does a CFS 3PL operator use? What are the metrics that they use to measure not only themselves, but the vendors as well? Things like compliance with delivery times from vendors. A CFS can monitor that on our behalf as the importer. The accuracy with which containers are stuffed in the CFS, that the right cargo goes to the right destination in the right quantities. Those are the KPIs that we're talking about. There's a whole suite that one might prepare. Third sub-bullet, and this relates to some previous sections that we looked at, the ability of the CFS to generate commercial docs on behalf of the vendors, especially in the scenario where goods are being delivered to the CFS by multiple vendors that are going to be split up for different destinations once the cargo is inside the CFS. The importer only gives the instructions on how to split purchase orders by destination once the goods are in the CFS. We talked about this in some detail in previous sections. That's what we mean here. Their FCR management capabilities, forwarder's cargo receipt, very important from an operational perspective, because we as the importer need to know when goods are delivered to the CFS. But as we've said at least a half a dozen times, the FCR can serve as the payment mechanism between the importer in the U.S. and the vendor too. And then finally on this slide, what are the transportation capabilities of the CFS operator? This takes us back to the theme of integration, because 3PL operators offer multiple services. There are very few CFSs at origin that don't offer ocean or air transportation. We'll talk about whether or not to integrate these services in upcoming slides, but we at least want to know, is the 3PL at origin licensed in the country of origin as a freight forwarder, an air freight forwarder, etc.? It's just good to know. This is a great little slide that helps to illustrate much of what we're talking about here, especially as we see in our title, choosing CFS locations in South China. We're going to present a real-world example here. What we're looking at is the Pearl River Delta, which has really served as the original geographic location where China's transformation into an export-oriented economy really began. This is a matter of historical fact. Just to give ourselves a little geographic orientation, we can see in the lower right, there's Hong Kong. Above that, you see places like Dushanbe, Chiwan, Shekou, and Yantian to the right. That's referred to as the East Pearl River Delta. And then more to the left, we see Nansha. Why are these locations highlighted in red? They're port operations, multiple terminal operations. And the point we're trying to illustrate here, and we said this previously, we want to have our CFS a reasonable distance from the port of export for drayage purposes, but also in close proximity to the cluster of vendors. And the original Chinese miracle that converted the economy from an agrarian economy to a manufacturing economy happened in the East Pearl River Delta. That is why, in the last 20 years, Yantian has very much supplanted Hong Kong as a location for CFS buyers consolidation operations, because the cluster of vendors was in that circular area that we see here. As the natural progression of manufacturing development took place in China, for lots of different reasons, access to labor, costs, etc., factories started to and continue to migrate from east to west, which is to say, from right to left. And this is where port operations like Chiwan and Dushanbe became more and more prominent. In this day and age, with manufacturing moving north and west in China, Nansha has come to be a prominent player as a port operation that by definition will be supported by CFS operations in close proximity. To do what? Deal with all the factories that are in the West Pearl River Delta. The point here is that we need to be thinking, what is the geographic location of the CFS going to be that we work with, but also its relation and proximity to ports of export. Another quick consideration before we wrap up this slide. The CFS location, clearly very important, but also the port operation. What are the sailing schedules out of the port? What steamship lines call on the port? It's very important to be shipping out of a port that has frequent sailings with the steamship lines that we as the importer work with, steamship lines that we have contracts with. It doesn't make much sense to have a service contract with steamship line A and set up a CFS near Nansha to accommodate our vendors in that area, and steamship line A doesn't sail in and out of Nansha. That's the point we're making here. Take an integrated approach to vendor clusters, CFS locations, and port of export operations. We'll wrap up here. We'll come back for one more section on buyers consol, and then we'll move on.